I'd like to welcome you all to our new venue, and very exciting and particularly comfortable it is. So it's wonderful to see you all here, including members of the public, speakers to public forum, and a range of people. So the very first thing I'd like to do is announce an opening prayer, and I'd like to invite the Very Reverend Dr. Tony Curtis, Dean of Dunedin, to open the meeting with a prayer. Thank you.
E te whānau kororia ki te atua, tēnā koe Mr. Mayor, tēnā koutou katoa. It is a delight to be standing in front of the highlights of Dunedin here on the screen and to start us off in a new session. I would like to start with a bit of scripture which I think will be helpful to us all in the coming years. And it's from the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 7. Wisdom is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God, and an image of God's goodness. Although she is but one, wisdom can do all things, and while remaining in herself, she renews all things. In every generation she passes into holy souls, and makes them friends of God and prophets. For God loves nothing so much as the person who lives with wisdom. She is more beautiful than the sun, and excels every constellation of the stars. Compared with the light, she is found to be superior, for it is succeeded by the night. But against wisdom, evil does not prevail. Kia hari ko te karaiti te ranga, te tāroia te riri. Kia ia te whakamomiti te kororia. Rejoice and be glad, Christ is the resurrection, the reconciler of quarrels. To him be praise and glory. God our mātua, as we start this new council, we pray for your wisdom. May it be our guide in all things, so that we may seek the good of this city and of its people. May we remember that all are made in your image with your dignity. And may we be reconcilers of quarrels. As we debate, as we vote, as we challenge one another, may we seek always first to serve your people. And we ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Kia ora, thank you very much. And kia ora tātou. Today we have two public forum speakers. So I'd like to invite Ian Hewson to come up and speak. Welcome, Mr. Hewson. You have 5 minutes to speak.
Hi everyone. My name's Ian Hewson. I'd like to start by expressing my thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. The issue that I'd like to draw everyone's attention to is that of council spending. But before I get on to that, let me congratulate those of you who've been newly elected to the council for the first time, and obviously, of course, our new mayor. I'm pleased to say that I voted for many of our first-time councillors, as well as some who achieved re-election, and also for our new mayor. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I think it's worth pointing out that you are all elected representatives. You represent me, and you represent thousands of other Dunedin voters who put you into the positions that you now hold. In the recent election, we saw 5 new councillors get elected, and what can only be described as a landslide win for our new mayor. I think it's worth drawing attention to the message that you've been sent by the voters. The fact that the incoming mayor received roughly double the votes of the incumbent Aaron Hawkins sends a very clear signal. The Dunedin voting public, whom you represent, have rejected the path that Mayor Hawkins was taking our city down. Now, I realise that there are matters of courtesy and politeness and protocol that need to be observed when you're on the council or in the office of mayor, and it's entirely appropriate for the council to acknowledge and to thank Aaron Hawkins for his contributions and service as councillor and mayor. However, the Dunedin voting public have given you a clear mandate, and that mandate is stop and change the direction that you've been going in previously. It's not business as usual after this election. The council can't just continue in its merry way with some new faces and a new mayor. It needs a change of direction. And the specific change of direction I'm talking about is in the area of council spending. An article in the ODT on September the 30th this year pointed out that the council has a budgeted capital program for the decade from 2021 onwards of $1.5 billion. That's in contrast to the $878 million that was considered necessary for the 10 years following 2018. We already have a debt of around $1 billion, which at current interest rates costs around $50 million per year. And I think it's pretty widely accepted that interest rates are continuing to rise in the immediate future. It's encouraging that Councillor van der Vis, who's been pretty outspoken regarding the huge amount of debt we've been taking on, has been appointed as chairman of finance and council-owned companies. But I would like to hear some strong commitments from the whole council that they intend to make reducing our debt a priority. A large proportion of your ratepayers are suffering financially with the increased cost of living, and that is only made worse by the ever-increasing rates burden that shows no sign of slowing down. I'm conscious I don't have much time, so I'll just quickly mention a couple of areas where council spending doesn't sit well with a lot of people. Firstly, spending millions of dollars employing people to begin implementing the Three Waters changes that the current government is attempting to force on councils around the country. Polls conducted throughout New Zealand show that people are overwhelmingly opposed to what the government is trying to do. Residents don't want the government to steal what they paid for. Since you are elected to represent us, you should be pushing back against these ill-thought-out reforms. Join with other councils around the country who are saying no rather than enabling the theft of locally owned assets. Secondly, spending over $28 million to give George Street a makeover. A makeover is in no way an essential activity. It doesn't matter that it's already started. Don't take it any further than it's already gone. I know that this has been claimed that the makeover will attract people into the centre of the city and be great for businesses, but quite frankly, many people don't believe the hype that has been promoted. Speaking of which, how is it justified to spend ratepayers' money to convince ratepayers that beautifying George Street is a great idea? How big should the DCC propaganda budget be? I think it should be zero. Like if you're running a business, it's fine to advertise. But I don't think it's fine to take public money and use it for purposes like that. Even if our government thinks it's fine, the council shouldn't be following suit. Let's say the council planners are correct and that it will be a great asset to the city. People will flock there and businesses will thrive. Well, let's wait and see the proof. You know, you'll have a test case. You'll have the shops that are inside the made-up area already and the control group, the shops that are outside it. Let's see what happens to those businesses. I know many have got business interests in some of those things. Sorry. Last bit. There's a lot more that could be said about this and other issues, so I might have to come back another time. We want to see a change in the direction that the council has been going. This election is giving you a clear mandate to stop and change direction. We want a council that listens to the people. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hewson. Are you prepared to take any questions?
Yes.
Are there any questions? It appears not. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now call Mr. Michael Lee, who would like to speak to us as well. Similarly, Mr. Lee, you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Michael Lee. I am the only British Horological Institute merit qualified watchmaker in New Zealand. I have owned and operated Southern Cross Jewellers in Princess Street, the Dunedin's oldest watchmakers, jewellers, gold buyers these past 25 years. Morris Bernstein, after fleeing the Nazis in World War II, established this business in and around Princess Street and in the same building I'm in now around the Exchange in the 1940s. My meeting here today is kind of twofold. My business at 378 Princess Street is the original solid building premises. It's being forcibly closed down and demolished by DCC enforced structural engineers and over enforcement TMC traffic management parking access workers. Now for the past 80 years we have run an important business services for Dunedin, fixing clocks, watches, watch batteries, overhauling timepieces and selling antique jewellery, etc. I wish this to continue with your help. I don't want to have to leave Dunedin, go overseas, take my skills elsewhere, and the services I'm actually doing for people. They can't get up George Street. It's getting less than, there's a worldwide shortage of watchmakers, people with my skills, so I am providing a good service. But it's getting more and more difficult with the buildings next to me are being demolished and they want to keep the facades at the front, which I understand. It's, you know, I'm into the history thing too, but to keep the facades in the buildings, they want to demolish my building, which is quite solid, and it's the original owner, which fled the Nazis and set it up in the 1940s, and was persecuted for his name. Called it Southern Cross Jewellers, and it's been owned. I've kept it going for 25 years, and a lot of yous, some of yous have visited my shop, got my services. So, yeah, I want this to continue. I've tried to find other premises, but the economic situation, it's not going to happen. They're all 4 times the rent that I'll be paying, and I know this is. It's my personal agenda, but even also, like Ian was talking about, getting up George Street, St Andrew Street, there's just so many unnecessary cones and parking, and the enforcement TMC guys won't let us have any parks. And so, yeah, with your help, I just, the time is to free up on that sort of stuff, even open up Maori Road and get rid of some of the judder bars, and so you can actually get around the city. Yeah, I understand there's a lot of work still going on and it needs to be finished and done right. But give us a break out there, Businesses, not just like myself, but there's other businesses around me, and we don't need excessive cones and cages and everything everywhere. So that's, I'm open for any questions if you want to know more about the details. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Witherell.
Thank you, Michael. I've just got a couple of questions. From memory, you have moved probably about 3 times from my memory. Is that correct? And how long have you been in your present location?
It's this original business, where it is now. The original business was there, and I visited there in the 1980s. But when I bought it off Mr. Bernstein, he had it in the Southern Cross building in the Exchange. He was in High Street back in the 1950s. Then he was in the Wayne's Hotel. And when I got it, I moved. I was in Bell Hill for 15 years, up opposite the Black Dog, where I provided a good service. It was easy access.
I remember him well. I remember his poodle, actually. I think it was a poodle.
Yeah, that's right.
His character.
Well,
he was a character, did not want to retire.
Yeah, I just like to mention, he called the shop Bernstein's, but after the war, people wouldn't come to him because they thought he was German, but he was Jewish. And he fled, and he trained me. Then I went on to England.
But back to the issue in hand, Michael. Do you own your building?
No, I don't own the building, but the landlord has been very good to me. He doesn't mind spending $1 million on it. But the structural engineers and the council are saying, no, you've got to spend $4 million. because you've got to have earthquake strength. Yes, they are falling down. They're falling in on themselves, the buildings next to me. But my building is very solid.
You seem quite confident, but we've got to protect your customers.
Yes, I
They're
understand.
going to be safe.
Yes, I understand that, but my building is safe and solid. But to protect the facade, which is, I don't think it's even necessary. It should, you know, if you're going to bowl it, just come in and bowl the front of it, and the facade is not that important, I feel. But, you know, try and keep my shop. This is Dunedin history, and I want it to continue, even take someone else on. And you yourself would know, Brent, how hard it is to get. You can't get into the Meridian to get a battery or get a watch or get a little job done. You can, but it's...
I thank my customers every day for making the effort, especially through these worrying times.
Yeah.
But thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervist, did I see your hand? Yes.
Just briefly, what is it you want council to do?
Well, talk to my landlord and try and work with him rather than the red tape of saying, no, you've got to have this, you've got to bowl the whole lot. He wants to work, he's worked very good with me, you know, he's let me do the labouring work and he's paid for things and he doesn't mind spending $1 million on those buildings. And yes, I understand they've got to be bowled, but you know, we have a lot of other problems with graffiti artists. You know, the council could help.
Yep, I get it.
There's all sorts of things. Just work with us, Lee, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee.
Michael.
Thank you, Lee. Alrighty, so we'll move on to the agenda proper. I imagine there are no apologies, seeing as we're all present. It's wonderful. And now the confirmation of the agenda. I move that the councillor confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Barker. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. Declarations of interest on page 5. Members are reminded of the need to stand aside from decision making when a conflict arises between their role as an elected representative and any private or other external interests they might have. Are there any changes or updates? Thank you. So I'll move the recommendation in the report that the elected members register is, we note it as attached and confirm the proposed management plan for elected members' interests and note the ELT interest register as well. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Barker. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. Carried. So moving on to the confirmation of minutes. So we have the minutes from the previous meeting. So I move that the Council confirms the public part of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on 26 October 2022 as a correct record. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mayhem, thank you. I'll put the motion. Does all those in favour say aye? Aye. Any against? Thank you. Carried. And so to the next item on the agenda. Proper, the interim speed management plan, which is on page 22 of your agenda, which is item 6 on our agenda. So I'd invite Mr. Drew and Mr. Simon Drew, General Manager of Infrastructure and Development, and Mr. Nick Sargent, who's the Transport Strategy Manager, to come to the table, please. And also Janine Benson, who's the General Manager of Transport. Thank you. Welcome to the three of you. Do you wish to speak to the report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Raddick. A few words, if I may.
Thank you.
Hello again to returning councillors and members, and welcome to new members. My name's Nick Sargent. I'm a Transport Strategy Manager. The setting of speed limits rule 2022 is a new approach to setting of speed limits and replaces the approach previously under the previous speed setting rule of 2017. It seeks to implement the Road to Zero road safety strategy, the Speed Management Guide, Road to Zero edition, and the mapping that goes with it. The focus of the speed management rule is essentially around schools at present. All schools should have a 30 kilometre per speed zone past them by June 2027, with an interim target of 40% by June 2024. To help members, it's worth being aware that there are 5 schools where you will need to refer to 2 documents, one of which is in front of you, and the other is the interim speed management plan to be issued by the state NZTA on Monday. Those schools are Waikuiti, which has a state highway adjoining it, George Street Normal, that has a state highway adjoining it, Amana Christian School, which has a state highway adjoining it, Lee Stream, and also Strath Tyree School. So for those schools, those schools will have to look at both documents to understand the extent of the changes around the schools. Those are all the comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent. Any other comments?
I'd just like to highlight that this decision that you're making today is about consulting. It's not about formal decisions being made by council in the new year. So the decision you're making today is just about consulting on speed management, primarily around schools and a couple of centres.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So we have questions. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the very extensive report. And Mr. Drew, you just answered my first question, was just confirming this is about consulting. Second question, I don't know who wants to answer this one. The requirement in there, it's mentioned a number of times, is for, I think, 40% by June 30th, 2024, prior to the 2027 completion date. Have you got any idea, because that sounds a long way away, but it's not, what percentage are we at now of that 40% requirement?
We're at about 28%. They're all the schools that presently have a variable 40 kilometre speed limit past them.
And thank you. Next question, Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Thank you for the report. First up, I note the timing of the consultation, and I know that it's aligning with Waka Kotahi, but it's not at a great time of year for schools. Has any thought gone into how you might support that in a way that would be helpful to schools?
As part of the preparation for this process, we wrote to all schools in August advising them of the changes, and you'll see that some schools responded. Also, we've offered to brief schools individually or meet with their boards should that be required of the schools, so we're happy to do that over the coming months.
Thank you. My next question is around enforcement, because we know from other experiences that that's part of the package. What commitment do we have from police around enforcement once these speed limits come in?
Obviously, I can't speak on behalf of police, but behind the scenes, the framework that has set forth the changes in the speed management guide has led to conversations between the police and NZTA. NZTA pay the police to deliver speed enforcement services, and they're working out what the level of service will be for future delivery in that space.
And my final question is just to ask if there's been any research done, any measurements of prior to the speed limits going in the safety zones around schools in the CBD area that have already happened, any pre and post measurement of the difference that's made Has any work been done on that, Mr. Sargent, at all?
Yes, we do have measurements of both before and after for the changes that were made, particularly around the switch to the 40 kilometre per hour zone.
And would you have any comments on that, the general trends?
Generally, from our post observations, which were done by tube counters, the speeds have dropped a little around the schools.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Hurland.
Thank you. Excuse me, I've got terrible hay fever this morning. I wondered, it certainly looks like the schools, every school that you contacted by the look of it is in support of this. Is that correct, or were there some schools that weren't in support?
You have all the responses that we received from schools in front of you.
Yes, and I would call them actually enthusiastic, aren't they? They're extremely keen, and many of them are saying it's way overdue, and the date that the 2027, certainly they're saying that's far too long to wait and they want it sooner. So there's definitely support from the schools. I just wondered, because obviously we did have some people who were opposed to it in Mosgiel when we brought out safer schools, but at that time it wasn't a speed limit reduction only. There was quite a few other things that were put across the road and everything. Is this just going to be a speed limit reduction, or is there going to be obstacles on the road and protrusions near the school? Is there going to be anything like that?
I think one of the things that it will be useful for council to be aware of is the mechanics behind the scene. Whereas before we could only implement lower speed limits past schools if we could absolutely guarantee that the speeds would drop to 40 kilometres or below. Now the regime has been changed such that we can reduce the speed limits first, monitor to see how they're how it plays out, and then reinforce with physical measures should we need. It's fair to say that some schools will require physical measures, particularly when they're on busy arterial roads even now, and you'll see an example of that in the papers before you. Purukanui School is probably one of the ones that will definitely require physical measures.
If that is the case, will those residents and the school be notified of what sort of protrusions or obstacles they can expect on the road? Because I know previously that was quite a surprise to residents, particularly in Mosgiel, and they didn't like it at all. So will there be notification of what's going to be put in there, if anything?
In common with all our minor safety works, we do write to affected parties before that and seek their feedback. So the answer to your question is yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervis.
Further to Councillor Gary's question on pre and post the speed limits that have already been put in, for instance, the 40k at Kaikoura Valley, you say that speeds have dropped. Do you have pre and post data on accident rates, and have they dropped?
It's fair to say that that's still playing out, because normally we look at the last 5 years' worth of data, and for those schools that have been implemented in the last 2 years, obviously we only have 2 years' worth of data. So as we get further from the implementation dates, we'll get a better idea of how the measures are playing out. But it's fair to say that this approach would not have been promoted by the agency if it was not provable that lower speeds reduced accidents.
But you don't actually have any data to show that. You have data to show that speeds have dropped, but you don't have data to show that accident rates have dropped.
We're still collecting it, as we said.
I'm just wondering why it is that you've collected the data on the speed dropping, but you don't seem to have anything on the accident rate. I would have thought they would have gone to, I would have thought the accident rate would have been what you would have focused on.
Well, we focus on both, but it's just that we are not as far away from the implementation of speed limits past some schools as others, so we haven't accumulated the data to make it provable, because in any year, any accident year, there's individual variation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ackland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I understand the recommended 30-kilometre speed limit for the school areas, but just wondering, where did the 10 kilometres for George Street come from?
The answer to that question is that the design speed, the George Street design, has a design speed of 10 kilometres per hour, and that's where it came from. So the existing block that is nearly complete has a design speed of 10 kilometres per hour and has designed to be a shared space, and therefore the speed is proposed to be 10 kilometres per hour.
So this is to do with the George Street redevelopment, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, the speed is directly aligned with the design of the road.
I recall 10 kilometres being a temporary speed limit for George Street through the COVID time when there was nobody out and about. Obviously no vehicles, but all the circles on the road. And I actually tried driving along George Street at 10 kilometres, and it's just about impossible. Is this a professional recommendation of 10 kilometres for George Street, or is this a preference from the designers?
In order to regulate a shared space, the designated speed is 10 kilometres per hour.
So what would have to happen if George Street remained at 30?
My advice would be that you would have to change the design.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Witherell.
Thank you. The perimeters of speed zones around schools, is that set basically one size fits all, or is it you consult with each individual school?
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. In bringing forward the proposals you see, we considered each school in turn. We considered the likely walking routes, the likely catchments, and we spoke to some schools. In fact, we're speaking to a lot of schools all the time because of the chaos outside the school gate, if you like. So the recommendations that we brought forward are the recommendations based on our best knowledge, but of course we cannot know everything about the city, so we're putting those proposals out there for the schools and the communities around the schools to provide feedback on. And we can see from the existing feedback already, some schools have pointed out some roads that we've missed out, and other schools have said perhaps the zone is a little big. So as we get feedback and take that information to hearings, we can finalise the exact size and nature of the zones.
Thank you. In regards to the 10 kilometre speed zone on George Street, implementing a speed zone that the police are not prepared to police, to me does not seem extremely sensible. And what will the outcome be for people that exceed those speed limits when they're not monitored?
My advice is that it would be very difficult for a driver to exceed the lower speed. So you've said that 10 kilometres would be difficult, but basically you won't be able to physically drive at 30 kilometres along the George Street design, so people won't drive at 30 kilometres along the George Street design.
Why would you not be able to travel faster than 10 kilometres?
It would be unwise if you were a car driver to travel faster than 10 kilometres because you're not using the shared space as it is intended to be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you. Just a quick question again on speed limits around the schools. Depending on where you drive, you come across either fixed and set permanent speeds of 30. In other areas, it is electronic and will change from being, for example, 50 down to 30 during school hours or thereabouts. Is there any, and I realise this is going out for discussion, but is there any consideration as to whether these will be fixed and permanent, or whether they will be, for want of a better expression, around the school hours?
As we said in the report, there are two possible approaches to implementing speed limits around schools. One is to envelop them in a permanent 30 area, if you like, and the other is to implement speed limit changes before and after schools in a variable sense. Now, how we got to the proposals that you see in front of you going out for consultation is that there are quite a significant number of schools that are in residential zones that the travelled speed is just not much above 30 in any case. So it seems sensible for those schools to have a permanent 30. Well, in other cases, obviously, the variable applies, so that and drivers will be alerted by signs, etc., so that they know that before and after school and at other times when children are present, a variable speed limit will be in operation.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. Further to Councillor Gary's question about the very short submission time, you say in your report that the reason for that is that you're aligning that with Wakakotahi's consultation on state highways. I can't see what the correlation between the school zone timeframe for consultation would be with that. And is there an ability for us to extend the consultation time?
In regards to consultation, the consultation time in the rule is a Section 82 consultation time, which is 3 weeks. We have actually extended that to be 4 weeks to be consistent with the NZTA's state highway time. So the rule specifically said that a special consultative procedure is not required.
And further to that, have you done any consultation with the Mornington and Caversham communities in particular?
As I alluded to earlier, we're always talking to schools and communities. Caversham School has made consistent representation to us about speeds past schools, as have indeed businesses in the centre.
I was meaning it more in reference to the fact that you've got that whole Mornington community, which is not by the Mornington School, and then the South Road, which is not by Caversham School. Those communities in particular, I was meaning.
Yep. And so, it's just where was my train of thought going? So you're right, Mornington is a special case. We recently consulted on a roundabout for the middle of Mornington to help manage traffic in and out of the supermarket, but the problems extend a little wider, which is why Mornington has been proposed. And then for Caversham, we have a school. We have 2 schools actually in Caversham and a third just on the border of Caversham, right next to the commercial centre, if you like. So in order to deal with all of that, we have proposed a 30 kilometre per hour permanent zone over the entire area. That's consistent with some of the conversations that we've had with schools and indeed with communities down some of those side roads around all of the area of Caversham. So it's consistent with the conversations we've had with individual parties, but this would be the first time that the entire community would have seen it in front of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we now have, we're going to a second round of questions from councillors who have asked them before. But at this point, I'd just like to firstly commend Mr. Sargent on his proximity to microphone, which is about a hand span away, and as you know, we were all able to hear Mr Sargent very clearly. So I'd recommend to councillors that they optimise their own distances to councillors so that the recording is nice and sharp, and the appropriate distance is about a handspan away. And so another question, please, from Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have small hands. Hopefully you can hear me. I have a couple of questions, or three questions actually, might even be four, about just clarifying things that have been asked already. Councillor Gary asked about enforcement. Is it not right to understand that enforcement is not just police, it's also enforcement by design?
Yes, I think that's a good observation, in that if you've got 80 or 85% of the people driving to the limit, the other 15 or 20 can't drive any faster than the limit.
Okay, thank you. And also going back to George Street, and I just want to clarify this and be really clear around this point. With the design we have there now that has been specifically drawn up to make the place a safe place for people, pedestrians, other users, cyclists, skaters, etc., to even think about having a speed above 10k could potentially be catastrophic or dangerous. We'll change the word catastrophic.
This is the way I'll answer the question. The space as currently being implemented has been designed as a 10 kilometre per hour space. If it was to be designed as a 30 kilometre per hour space, you would at a minimum reintroduce curbs so that there was a separation between pedestrians and the vehicles. That would be the minimum.
Thank you. And reading the attached report, the thing that stood out for me and probably for everybody actually was the stat very early on that talks about the potential to be killed or survive at 30 as opposed to 50. And I think it says at 30 Ks, you nearly always survive the impact. But at 50k, you it always nearly results in death or injury. Can I just clarify that is not just something plucked out the air? That stat emanates from sound, robust, long-term international data.
Yes, we are simply reusing well-proven international research, and the diagram that is in the interim speed management plan has come directly from the research done by the New Zealand Transport Agency and applied to New Zealand conditions. It's actually very stark when you realise that.
And if the Mayor will indulge me, one final question, thank you. And there's a lot of, I imagine there'll be a lot of thinking about people looking at the maps and thinking that the 30k extending beyond the school seems unfair in some way, but can I be assured that that is because it is assumed that by doing that we will finally be able to attract some sort of shift towards active transport because people will be moving from distant areas from the school to access the school? Is that the thinking behind that, to create routes that are safe?
Yes, I mean, essentially we've looked at the walking catchments and tried to define an area that is most appropriate for a 30 kilometre per hour zone. So yes, that's absolutely the thinking. And I would just add, New Zealand's been on a bit of a journey when, schools at one time actively discouraged children from taking active modes to school. They banned cycling from school, for example. And so we have gone that way, and now we're travelling back to somewhere else.
Thank you. Councillor Hulan.
Thank you. I've probably got 3 or 4 questions as well. It makes sense to me from reading the report that, to have at least temporary speed reductions. What I mean by that is during school time, certainly. I mean, I think there's a very, very strong argument for that. My question is there a strong argument to extend that? I don't know whether we need to do that. Is that a decision? If we approve this, does that mean we're approving extending the speed limit, the lower reduction of the speed limits out right across almost the whole city. Is that what?
As we said at the beginning, this is designed to stimulate the consultation and provide feedback. And I expect when we get the feedback, we will look at larger or smaller areas in some cases. We will look at variable instead of permanent, or permanent instead of variable. That will be a discussion for the hearings committee to have.
Do you want a recommendation from this council today on what we'd prefer? Is that what you'd like?
That's not the process today. We're launching for consultation. We'll hear feedback, and then in April, we would March or April, depending how quickly we can pull things together after the hearings, we will provide a report back to full council, and a resolution of full council will provide permission for the implementation of the new speed limits.
So I'll just jump in. In the next steps, it outlines what will happen once we've gone through the consultation period, and that will include a hearing that will be constituted under the new hearings committee, and depending, on what's chosen for the councillors there. And so that's the opportunity when it comes, following hearings, when it comes back to council.
Thank you. So will the consultation be covering the whole areas, or just by the school, school times? Like, how will we determine we'll be asking people what they want? Is that what you're saying?
The consultation document is the document that's on your papers, and so that's what we'll be consulting on.
Right.
That's correct, isn't it, Mr. Sargent?
That's correct. The proposals are in front of you, and of course, through the consultation process and the hearings process, the proposals could be amended. But those are the current proposals, and they're a mix of, as I said, permanent and variable, and we'll discuss the extents, we'll discuss the times of implementation, etc.
And I would just say we are required to have something to consult on. So council needs to have a starting position, and as Mr. Sargent, I think, has explained, this is that. Following consultation, it's highly likely that there will be changes, whether it's extending, contracting, flexible or fixed. So,
because I think there's a very strong argument for it to be reduced around the schools. But
Councillor, I would suggest that because we haven't yet heard this, the comments need to be about the proposal rather than forming a view until you've heard back a bit from the consultation.
Well, I'm just wondering if you want an amendment from us today around changes or not. No.
But council are free to add things in if they want. Doing that, and I think the report says that in the options, would mean that we would not be able to consult in the time period that we have indicated. And Mr. Sargent indicated that there are 5 schools, I think, that are bounded by state highways, or that have state highways as part of their need for a review, and lining this up with that consultation makes sense, particularly for those 5 schools, but broadly when you are considering speed management in the round across the city.
If we haven't got time to amend any of this, why is that? Why is there such a short time frame?
Councillor, I don't believe there is a short time frame. We're required to consult. Council can choose to consult at a different time. That is entirely up to you. Staff have extended the period to 4 weeks. We were cognisant of the lead up to the school holidays, but as Mr. Sargent pointed out, we've done a lot of work with schools already. If we delay, which council can do, that's an option, is you can delay the consultation and we can do it at a different time, but you lose the benefits of schools being able to consider their issues in the round alongside the state highway consultation.
And it's also important to note, also in next steps, that we've already started preparing the full speed management plan that'll look at all of Dunedin, and so we'll start having additional conversations early next year and consult on those next year.
Right.
So this is primarily to get the school zones being talked about by the community, so we can meet our legislative requirement to get 40% of them done by June 2024.
Thank you. So I've got a question around George Street. If there's to be a review of George Street, is there any point discussing or voting on the speed limit for George Street if we're looking at a review, if that is to happen? And second, my other question is around that. I'm assuming we'll take the votes separately for George Street compared to the school. Well, because it's mentioned in the paper, that's all.
No, the decision is to accept with any amendments or not this document for consultation, and George Street is part of that consultation. The issue with George Street is, within a couple of weeks we'll have a space that is designed for slow speed, a shared space without delineation between pedestrian areas and vehicle areas, where best practice and the design requires 10Ks. So we have a period of time where there is a block that's designed for 10K.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Melly, did you have a clarification question?
I just wanted a clarification question. We're not setting any speed limits here today, are we, Your Worship? We are setting a consultation document, and the feedback from the consultation will then go towards making a decision to setting those speed limits in the next year.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move on to Deputy Mayor Marker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is just something that Councillor Gilbert brought up about speeds, the permanent versus variable. Has there been any studies made on people's habits when speed limits are changing during days of the week, school holidays, etc., that might affect their ability to remember or see what the speed limits are?
I think if I referred to the answer I gave earlier, the areas that are proposed to be permanent 30 kilometres per hour are more likely to be in areas where people are driving around 30 kilometres per hour anyway, because of the nature of the streets. A lot of them are narrow or steep, they have no footpaths, etc. So they would be exercising caution, and therefore the variable ones are more likely to be deployed and the signs switched on the main roads, and that the signs would only be switched on during school hours. And presently, not quite all, but we're moving to a system where the signs are switched on centrally for all of the city, so that individual schools don't have to remember to turn them off and on again.
Great, thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. This is a question of clarification, really. Under this proposal, the speed limit bylaw would be done away with. I just want to have reassurance that decisions made recently under that bylaw will still be valid.
Yes, the process was that the speed limits, as a result of Amendment 11, which was the last amendment considered by Council, were sucked into the National Speed Limits Register and became the official record for speed limits in the city. And that's the case for Dunedin. It was sucked into the official record about June of this year. There are other councils where that doesn't apply, and they're going through transition arrangements, but that doesn't apply to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent Pope.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question around the comment you made, Mr Sargent, about curbing being required should there be any changes to the 10K speed area. It's correct to say, is it not, that the dishing that is part of the current design is the stated preference of the disability sector in terms of people who have impaired mobility or are using chairs?
I think that's not my area of expertise. So my area of expertise is around setting speed limits.
I'm happy to have Mr Drew answer.
So feedback from the disabilities community was, yes, the moving away from curbs where they can only cross at certain points with cuts was not preferred to the area where they could move freely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whiteley.
Thank you, Mayor Raddick. Mr Sargent, even though this paper is titled Dunedin Interim Speed Management Plan and talks about Dunedin schools, this is a nationwide program that's been rolled out and schools up and down the country are being introduced to this change, and the roads around the schools. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. It's a national rule, therefore all councils are grappling with this. Some councils are further along the process than others, and so you would have seen in the news that there are headlines about speed setting from other councils across the country, and it's because of the change in the rule and the requirement to implement speed limits past all schools by 2027.
Perfect, thank you. And the other, I've got two quick more questions. The second one being, you collect a lot of data even ahead of the going through this process. You know what speeds are on some of the roads already, and having gone through the speed limit or chaired the speed limit bylaw hearing recently in the last 2 years, that information feeds into the hearing process, doesn't it? And so, for example, where you have a data record of, say, 38 kilometres an hour on average in a 50k zone, that information gets fed in as part of the decision-making process, correct?
As I said earlier in one of my responses, clearly information we have at our hand has been used to determine the type of zone and the extent of the zone. I can't pretend that we have speed limit information on every road in the city. We don't. So there's that. And I've lost my train of thought on the second.
No, that's okay. You've actually answered the question on that basis. And schools that have gone through this process, and the one I'm thinking that I travel past most frequently is Bayfield High School, and the changes that were made and the improvements that were made for the whole community, not just the school community, had quite an impact. Is that the similar type of program that that you're wanting to see the effect of through this consultation process, where schools can actually talk about the positives that have also affected them and the school communities, and actually the community as a whole can come out and can be involved in the consultation period from 14th of November to the 9th of December?
I think to answer that question, as I said earlier, we are in constant dialogue with quite a lot of our schools. A lot of the comment we get from schools, why aren't you doing us next? Why aren't you doing us next? Why aren't you doing us next? Well, I think this plan is really about, we are going to do every school as quickly as possible, and we'll come to you very soon. So, and tell us how you would talk to us about how you would like it implemented around your school.
Thank you. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I just have a question before that, if that's right. I'd just like to ask, we're at 28% of compliance currently, and we need to get to 40%. Once all of these schools in this tranche of proposals are done, what percentage will we be at?
We'll be at 100%, but it depends how quickly we can get through the list, given that we have about 47 to go, or whatever the number is. Yep. It's also worth saying, as a matter of clarification, when the rule was issued, I immediately asked of the drafters and of NZTA if we could immediately change the speed limits on the existing 40 kilometres per hour to 30 kilometres per hour. The answer was, no, you can't do that, but you can consult on it, and then you can change it immediately, that there has been a resolution of council, which will be around April.
Wonderful. We have a further question from Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a quick one on basically our ability to choose what we want to do here. And you just noted there used to be 40 Ks around the schools. Am I correct in recalling that we actually proposed 30 back in that day, and then the NZTA said, no, you can't use 30, you have to use 40?
You are correct. We originally wanted to go to 30, and it goes to the mechanics of the rule. in that we could only implement a lower speed zone if we could absolutely guarantee that the speed would drop. But now that's been flipped on its head. We can implement the speed zone and now we can monitor it, and if the speeds haven't dropped, we can implement. So it's just a complete change in approach.
And effectively, I guess where I'm going with this is, along with the 10 km/h speed for a shared space with high pedestrian use, these are in many respects externalised standards that are put upon us to comply with, rather than ones that we're necessarily coming up. I mean, we come up with them ourselves, but effectively they have to align with what Waka Kotahi has said you will do in that space. Is that correct?
Clearly, my job is to advise you to apply national guidelines, which is what we do. But of course, the whole process brings the local flavour to the conversation.
But they are national guidelines that we're following.
Correct.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder. So would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Winsberg?
Just briefly, I think we've had a pretty good thrash around. I'd like to thank the staff for this. Nothing quite like speed limits to create interest, shall we say, but we are talking about safety here, and we're talking about safety for people who are vulnerable, particularly around schools. I think some of the improvements we've seen around the city lately are great, and I'm looking forward to more of the same being consulted on, and I guess the debate that we will have will be the debate when the results of the consultation come back to us.
Thank you. Who would like to speak? So we'll start with Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the mover and seconder, and thank you to Councillor O'Malley for reminding me of the misery the Port Chalmers community had to go through when it was battling NZTA, with the community overwhelmingly wanting a 30k zone, and after years and years in battling, it came out as 40k. So we'll see where we go from here. And again, as Councillor O'Malley said, let's just be cognizant of the fact here. This is a draft interim speed management plan, a plan that will, that continues the conversation around what we need to do in this country around speed, and particularly in Dunedin for us. And of course, it will inform what comes to us next year. And I'm looking over at you over there. I've forgotten your name. Wiley, thank you. How long have I known you? The times we've sat around on the speed bylaws, and I don't think anyone will miss us as an RCA under a bylaw setting speed limits. I think that it's something that will be welcomely thrown into the past. I mentioned earlier the stats purposely around, it's in our documents, around the 30k, 50k. And I think when people come to submit on this should be front of centre of your thinking, that a crash at 30 kilometres per hour is nearly always survivable for a variety of crash types, whether that's car on car, car on person, or car on bike. But just raising that by 20k's to 50k nearly always results in death or severe injury. And that fact is indisputable. And I think that needs to sit in the context of some of the frustrations we all feel sometimes as drivers when change happens. And I think that needs to sit in the context of the fact that is a life worth getting frustrated over a 20-second, 30-second, or even a 2-minute addition to your drive? And I don't think it is, because that's a death or injury that accrues to kids, to the elderly, to our families and whānau. So I just want to remind people who do submit on this to bear that in mind. And also remember that we're way behind the game. Everyone knows I come from Europe. The deaths on the road in the UK, for example, are very low. And countries like Sweden have had a 30k limit in their urban zone literally since the 70s. So all we're doing here is playing catch up, and all we're doing here is trying to reduce what is an absolutely disgusting road toll on New Zealand's roads. Thank you.
Councillor Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm certainly supporting this in the sense that this is going out for consultation, and I do agree with Councillor Walker that the 30 versus 50 kilometre an hour, the data, the facts, are 100% correct. But my biggest concern is 10 kilometres an hour in George Street, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that it should be faster at the moment, because it seems to me that what's happened with this George Street redevelopment is that we've turned the carriageway, i.e. the road, into a footpath. And now we're going to put cars on a footpath going at 10 kilometres an hour. Now, I don't know if anybody has taken any notice of mobility scooters and the like, and I think they go normally anywhere between 5 and 8 kilometres an hour. But they do it on the footpath, and a lot of people get injured. And we want to put motor vehicles on the footpath, which is essentially what the road is becoming in George Street, at 10 kilometres an hour. I think there needs to be a lot more work done and a lot more consideration put into how this George Street vehicle versus pedestrian is going to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Vis.
I'm entirely happy with the lower speed limit around schools. The idea, though, that simply lower speed limits are going to reduce the road toll is not one that's borne out by European experience, as I understand it. If you look at Germany, for instance, they insist in many cases on a 15-kilometre speed limit around schools, and yet when you get out on the motorway, basically you can pretty much do whatever you like. There are 130k limits, but there are virtually no police. I spent 6 months in Germany once and saw one speed trap the whole time I was there. So the idea that just because you lower speed limits, you're going to lower the road toll is, I think, something that isn't borne out by overseas experience. If you lower the speed limit, I'm talking about open road speed limits now, you get bored and distracted drivers, you get frustrated drivers. There are all sorts of other things that come into play, which is why I think what we should be looking at is not lowering speed limits as an aim in itself, although in the case of schools I think it's entirely appropriate. So happy to vote for this. But we should be very wary of the move to want to lower speed limits generally, in the belief that automatically on the open road that's going to reduce the road toll. If you look at Germany's road toll compared to ours, we kill more than twice as many people on our roads as they do. And the claim that it's because they have great autobahns is simply not true. They have a lot of very small roads like us, and they have 2 months a year of snow and ice on their autobahns, which are diabolical. The real issue, I believe, if we're going to look at the road toll on the open roads, is we need to look at our culture of drunk driving. It's completely not tolerated in Europe. You get caught drunk behind the wheel of a car, it doesn't have to be moving, instant loss of licence, second time loss of licence forever and car. So, yeah, happy to move with this, but let's please look at reducing accidents and injuries rather than just always looking at reducing speeds.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. If you speak to any school principal and parents, you will know that outside schools is somewhat of a nightmare at drop-off and pick-up time. And I noticed on page 40 the comment that we want a road network where no one dies or is seriously injured, and I can't imagine anyone would disagree with that. Thank you, Councillor Walker, for reminding us that the 30 versus 50k speed limit and the impact of that should be front and centre when we go to the hearing stage and people making submissions. And this is ostensibly about our tamariki in the school areas. I noted the school feedback overwhelmingly in support of the draft. I did notice that there was some very obvious schools missing, given that we have had submissions from them. And in particular, I noticed that the 3 Peninsula schools were missing, which I was curious about because we have had submissions from 2 of them. And I pursued that a little further because I was interested in as to why. And it was because of 2 acting principals and a new principal, and simply the schools had been incredibly busy and it had fallen between the cracks. It wasn't that they didn't support it, but they did understand that we are going to another stage of consultation, and there'll be another couple of opportunities to, the next stage will be to consult, and then I believe there's another opportunity at the design phase. So that's good. However, I picked up some very interesting comments from them along the way, and as some of you will remember, we've had some speed limit changes in that community recently. And the principal of McAndrew Bay School told me that while there was a lot of talk and pushback on the speed limits initially, behaviour has changed. And I happened, as I drove in this morning, to come across the local police officer, and we had a chat. And he also noted changes in behaviour. So while people find the inconvenience of slowing down on occasions really difficult, the actual evidence is that they do adhere to the speed limits eventually. And this is going to be really important if we want our tamariki to be safe. I'm fully supportive of this draft, and I thank the staff for their extensive work on it, on the report, and the work with schools leading up to this. And I know that will continue, and I know the timing isn't ideal, but we've got what we've got, and I appreciate the fact that you will continue to work with schools and go in person as required to talk with them. But the reason, above all, that I'm supporting this is that it is allowing a bespoke and agile response in the way that communities and schools have asked us to respond. And we've heard about some of that where schools have said, we want this, we want it yesterday, and we haven't been able to do that. It also allows us to trial initiatives in particular areas. And each school has its own bespoke geographical and community aspects to it. So I look forward to this going to consultation. I absolutely support the staff's initiatives to make that very thorough, and I look forward to when we get to the hearings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I fully support speed reductions around schools. Clearly, every letter was in support, and as I said before in question time, enthusiastic support. So I think, well, obviously that will go to consultation, so I would imagine that that will be a positive outcome. However, I'm not sure whether I support having the reduced speed all the time. And given where I live out in the West Harbour, is that there's quite, not long areas, but reasonable areas where the speed changes from 50 to 80 to sometimes 60, and it gets a bit confusing. But what is infuriating is that if you get someone sitting in front of you in the 80, when you finally get there and they're going 40. So what I would say is that I agree with the speaker who spoke earlier and said that sometimes just lowering the speed limit isn't always the answer. I'm not talking about around schools, I'm talking about permanent reductions in normal areas where all of us are driving. Is sometimes when people are going slower, it can cause other drivers to get extremely angry and annoyed about it and make silly passing moves that create accidents. And that's actually a fact when we're talking facts. Is that, a lot of accidents do happen with people getting impatient, with people going extremely slowly. And I think people who go very, very slowly should also be considered having some sort of ban on them as well, because quite frankly, they are quite often a bit of a hazard to the road. But 10 kilometres an hour along George Street, in my opinion, is absolutely ridiculous. And I hope common sense prevails.
Thank you. I think that was almost exhausted speakers, but Councillor Malley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think there's any too much controversy in this consultation document, to be honest myself, and it is a consultation document, so if anybody has opinions on things, they are free to submit their opinion on it. I do want to comment on the 10K though. It is a standard speed for shared spaces, and it is operable speed in other parts of the country, and we wouldn't be offering anything different as a starting point in a consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the key is that this is going out for consultation, and I think really it's about lifting the awareness factor that we want the community to actually engage in this consultation. Yes, it's not probably the most ideal timing for schools, but actually I think it is, because with the better weather, we're seeing a lot more young people moving around, travelling to and from schools, whether walking, riding their bikes, scootering or skateboarding. And I think when we look at the safer speeds around schools and what this report is about, it is about safety. It is about improving well-being around schools. And I think that's what we really have to sort of focus on. I was very heartened to read the letters that have come with this report from the schools and the effects it has on them. Also noting what Mr. Sargent said, 28% at present meet the required RCA, the Road Controlling Authorities plan to reduce speed limits around all schools by 31st of December 2027, and to get 40% of that by 30th of June 2024. So this is about consulting, it's about getting people's opinions, and it's about safety. Thank you.
Very good. I think we've exhausted questions. Would the mover like to exercise reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of comments. I certainly appreciate, and I think we as a community should be grateful for the recognition that this is a safety issue and actually making further progress in terms of the safety of our young people. I welcome Councillor Ackland's desire to fully pedestrianise George Street. That's great. And in response to Councillor van der Vis, I'd say that yes, we do have a long way to go, and Whakakotahi is finally starting to make progress about better road design. The reason the Germans drive like maniacs is because they've got well-designed roads, well-maintained vehicles, and there are very few head-on crashes on roads like Autobahn for that reason. And I think everyone in this community, the New Zealand community, is aware that there is a wider issue around speed, both on the highways and also in suburban areas. Many people at this table have heard me say that before. Some of it is self-policing because of the number of vehicles and parked vehicles forcing us to behave more sensibly. But I welcome this consultation document, and I hope as many members of the community as possible will get involved in the process.
Thank you. We're done. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried. And now I think we should have a 5-minute recess because we're about due for a break at this stage, and then we'll come back for the next item. Thank you. Oh, yes, happy to move. Councillor Walker, seconded Councillor Malley. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? So let's move on to item number 7, which is the MOU, an important document. And I'd like to welcome Ms. Graham and Ms. Wakaira to the table, please. So, councillors, we have a report in front of us. Would either of you like to speak to the report, please?
Mr. Mayor, just to update councillors, we have circulated a revised draft relationship agreement, which you all should have received, which incorporates the various feedback we've had from many of you, and all of those suggested changes have been incorporated into the draft agreement, and that has been circulated to Mana Whenua, who advise that they are happy with all the changes proposed.
Thank you. Are you happy to take questions?
Certainly.
And so, what questions do we have? Let's start with Councillor Vandervis.
I was part of the 2006 Maori MOU, which at the time was quite a significant document, like this one is. And at the time there was quite a bit of debate over it, and the issues of what our obligations were under the Treaty of Waitangi were pretty much well thrashed out. My question is, what obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi that we now identify that were not satisfied by the 2006 Maori MOU? What new obligations do we have under the Treaty of Waitangi that weren't covered by the 2006 MOU?
Thank you, Councillor. There are, well, as you know, that the Local Government Act 2002 sets up our relationship with Māori, and there are a number of provisions in that Act for councils to consider developing mechanisms and processes to ensure that council's relationship with Māori, and I'm saying Māori because that is how it is worded in the Act, enables effective participation and effective opportunities for decision making in local government. So that's a 2002 Act. The first MOU was signed in 2006. There are no new Treaty of Waitangi provisions in the Act, but from between 2006 and 2022, there have been a number of changes in the relationship between mana whenua and council, and these have not been reflected in any review of the 2006 MOU.
Right, but my question really was, why do we need to change the 2006 Maori MOU when in fact it is completely adequate in terms of meeting our treaty obligations, and it has facilitated the changes that you've highlighted with the new representation we now have on some of our standing committees. That has all been done under the umbrella, if you like, of the 2006 MOU. I'm trying to find what in these 27 pages of new provisions or new statements, in fact there are a lot of statements here that don't seem to have any rationale, what is it that we are required to do that we need this new revision for? The previous revision met all our obligations. It created a situation in which we could develop the relationship. Why is it that we need this essentially legal agreement now that goes so much further into what I consider to be co-governance?
So if I could, I'll try and answer this. You highlighted, Councillor, that we made good progress with our relationship with mana whenua under the old MOU, and we agree with that, and the covering report highlights that, but it also highlights that that progress needs to be then represented in the agreement between the parties, and the 2006 agreement didn't recognise the progress that we had made. So the new relationship agreement, as it's called, we believe recognises in an agreement that will be signed potentially by the two parties the progress that we have made since 2006.
Why would a 2006 MOU recognise something that happened years afterwards? And what is the need to recognise that in a new legal structure?
I'm not sure that I understand your question. What you have in front of you is an update on the 2006 document, reframed to reflect where the partnership between mana whenua and this council has progressed since the last document was signed.
Okay. I will have some more questions, but I'll give someone else an opportunity at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Just for clarification, could I ask who wrote this MOU? Was that Runaka wrote it?
So council at a hui, I think in May this year, was it May? Might have been April. May this year, discussed a revision of the 2006 agreement and the structure of the then named Māori Participation Working Party, and council asked if Runaka would take the lead, which they did, and then as the report says, Runaka then worked with staff, and we have provided some feedback from the officer point of view on some of the DCC content in the document.
So this has been written by Runaka and some council staff, is it?
Correct.
Correct, thank you.
And the final version had feedback that has been received from councillors.
Yes, yep. Because mana whenua aren't here, we can't ask them this question, but I don't know whether you're able to answer this or not, but do mana whenua think that this MOU, by signing this, will mean co-governance? I'm not saying whether I disagree or agree on that, or what, it's not an issue of that. I'm just wanting to understand what they believe to be the case by signing this.
I think the purpose is set out really clearly at the beginning of this, and that is to embed a new era of partnership between the parties. Mm-hmm. It is not co-governance.
Right.
It is a relationship agreement and an update on what was already there as a 2006 Memorandum of Understanding.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Sorry, I must have just been waving. No.
Councillor Vandevers.
It says in 6.10, or in the version that I've got, and I'm not sure whether this bit has been updated or not, that in the interests of clear communication and no surprises, any public statement about this agreement must be made only with the agreement of both parties. I see this as a complete muzzling clause, and one.
It's been updated.
It's been updated.
This in the recirculated document that you will have received. If with the leave, Mr. Mayor, I will read the clause as it is now written.
Yes, please.
In the interest of clear communication and no surprises, any public statement about this agreement by either party must only be made with the agreement of both parties.
Okay, so and you've gone back already and checked that that's okay with mana whenua as well?
I have.
Okay, so we have here 27 pages of clauses which it would appear haven't been run past our lawyers.
Can I just have a point of order?
Earlier than
point of order.
Yesterday. Sorry, Councillor Vandevers, we have a point of order.
I'm not sure the exact one, but it's clarity on the statement. There's not 27 pages of agreement here. If you take away the cover and the signature page, there's 5.
25.2D.
Yeah, 25.2D.
Yes, a good number of those pages are appendices and clarification pages, glossary, etc. 5 pages.
If an agreement doesn't allow you to have the glossary to go with it, surely that's got to be part of the agreement, otherwise you can't read the agreement. I think, quite frankly,
there's a
some hair splitting going on here.
Hang on. Well, I think there's a reasonable point to be made there, because also in this report is the previous agreement, the previous MOU, plus clarification of that, so that all councillors have a full understanding of the whole picture. So I think it's fair to pull it back to the Memorandum of Understanding, which is 5 pages.
5 page.
If I might, Mr. Mayor, the appendices count, and so I think the MOU itself with appendices including the terms of reference for Te Pai Māori and the glossary, which should all be read as part, are 14 pages in total.
Okay, so we have an agreement on 14 pages. We'll stick with that.
I'm happy to stick with 14 pages, but wonder why we're splitting this particular hair. The changes that have been made just very recently in the last day by having legal oversight, why did we not get legal oversight before to pick up such major issues as not being able to use the term, for instance, treaty partner?
We had legal oversight and they reviewed the document, and the treaty partner phrase was the only one in that one particular context that is used in other contexts in the document where the lawyers were happy that it remained. And so that was the only phrase in the document. Seemed prudent to get advice at that point once the various parties had suggested changes. So we reviewed the changed version.
Okay, so given that we've had a series of changes since the weekend, many of which I believe I've at least tried to instigate, some of them have been changed, and I appreciate that. How is it that we can make a decision today when there's been no consultation on the original 14-page document, or the very recent changes to it as recently as last night? How can we go ahead now and actually vote on this when there has been no public consultation and when the document claims to be a no surprises document? I believe this will be one of the biggest surprises most people have actually seen if it comes out in tomorrow's paper that we actually sign this off.
I'm not sure of your question. There's no requirement.
Question is, where's the consultation?
There's no requirement for public consultation on this. Council asked that Runaka draft a document. It was drafted. Staff worked on it. It formed part of a public agenda, so it's been in the public domain since Thursday. Changes that are relatively minor in the context of the 14 pages have been made, and the document is now before you for decision or otherwise. It's ultimately for Council to determine if they wish to approve what has been outlined in the recommendations, which is to authorise the Mayor to sign the document on behalf of the Council at the hui with mana whenua on Friday.
Thank you.
That looks like we've exhausted questions, and I would like to move the recommendations. So, and is there a seconder? Councillor Mayhew, thank you. I personally think this is a very significant agreement with which to start the new triennium. And it represents a heightened awareness of the needs of both parties and signals increased communication and mutually beneficial activity. And for me, communication is the key, which unlocks the door to action. And I hope that much positive action will result from this Memorandum of Understanding between us. And I'm particularly pleased that it provides for the inclusion of all councillors, which was lacking previously. And in these days, with so many multimedia channels and instant communication around the globe, it's rather ironic that misunderstandings can flourish dramatically similarly around the globe or within our community. So it's more important than ever that we have a solid basis on which to build our communication platform and a clear intent to proceed on a communicative, collaborative basis. And that is what this Memorandum of Understanding is about. So considerable effort has been put into the detail in order to accommodate the perspective of all parties, and I commend it to you. Who would like to speak to the motion? I'll start with Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I pretty much support everything you've just said there, and I enjoyed reading this document. And I'll repeat just a few of the things that staff said, and I'll be relatively brief about it. This is not co-governance. It's a relationship agreement, and simply within that, I think Ms. Wikaira said it's a new era of partnership, and simply it's reframed to recognise where we began in 2006. I therefore obviously support it, and I thank the Runaka for their work on it. I thank our staff for our work on it, and I very much look forward, if this gets approval, for you being able to sign this document at the marae on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was there at the meeting on the 18th of May this year where we had the discussion about the new MOU, and it was agreed that the Runaka would draft up the document for us. So I'm really pleased to see it before us here today. It was absolutely time to update it. 2006, pretty old and dusty, and things have changed. We've got Runaka on our standing committees. where their membership is highly valued and their presence valuable to us as well. So we're moving on from an agreement which was about providing advice and facilitating perspectives with limited membership to creating an inclusive partnership with Runaka, Matawaka and, as the Mayor mentioned, all councillors as members. And this enables us to build better relationships, have a constructive relationship, and also the focus on the strategic oversight of the Māori strategic framework, which was something that we were discussing earlier. And this will lead to positive outcomes for us all. As the report says, the intended outcome of the agreement is to facilitate a relationship of mutual benefit between Ka Runaka and the Council in order to produce meaningful outcomes for current and future generations of mana whenua, Māori and all citizens of Dunedin. So this provides a framework for us to communicate, as the Mayor said, going forward. It's an opportune time at the start of the triennium to refresh this relationship agreement and work towards a more beneficial partnership, and our relationship with mana whenua is of vital importance for us and underpins all that we do. I'm looking forward to this signing on marae. My kaiako teacher, Tans, gave us a whakatoki, which I think is pretty appropriate today. Naku tu guroro, nau tu roro ka ore ai te iwi. With your basket and my basket, the people will live, and I think that shows the intent of our partnership agreement.
Thank you. Councillor Vandevers.
In my view, this revision of the 2006 MOU is not only not necessary, but I don't believe it is fit for purpose. The entire basis of this new agreement is that it was formatted in the weekend as we were supposedly a treaty partner, which we are plainly not. On my objections, this fundamental assumption has been removed last night. Only at the front end of it, it still continues on through the rest of the document. The agreement also claims that we were subject to a range of legal obligations without specifying what those legal obligations are, and that were not already completely satisfied by the existing 2006 MOU. So what is the need for all of these 14 pages of detailed agreement clauses containing scores of poorly understood Maori words and concepts? As an example of a poorly understood concept, I tried to pick apart the Maori concept of ownership in one of our workshops, and was twice told that it's such a big issue that it wasn't something that could be dealt with in that situation. Ownership in English is simply control of an asset. Ownership, when it's used in this document, can mean, apparently, almost anything you like. And when you look at the range of different meanings for Maori words in the glossary, you will realise how fraught it is to have an agreement that is legally binding that can be so variously interpreted. This is asking for a lot of trouble going forward, I believe. The proposed agreement now says that, without justification, that the DCC, quote, is agent for the Crown for the purposes of the Treaty of Waitangi, which I do not believe to be true. I don't believe that we are agent for the Crown. We are representatives of the local Dunedin people. We're not agent for the Crown. I've checked with a retired lawyer, and his advice is that he doesn't believe it's the case either, and that if it is to be the case, it needs to be taken to the Solicitor General, as this has enormous legal implications for councils around the country. The fundamental basis of this massively changed review is based on what I believe to be a fallacy. In my view, Item 7 agreement proposal is a wide-ranging and politically divisive document. Issues include screeds of Maori words that make some of the Item 7 documents unreadable for English-only speakers like myself, even though a glossary is attached. I've spent a lot of time going to the glossary, going back to the thing, trying to understand what the meanings are, what the concepts are, and it has taken most of my time actually since the weekend. Some of the glossary Maori words translate, for instance, into burning fires of occupation, authority over land or territory, And that reminded me of Councillor Laufiso's recent council meeting claim that all land here is Maori land. I believe that this is extremely worrying in terms of us agreeing to a document that gives authority over land and territory when that's not defined. Is it all Maori land? Is it just some of it? Another one of the Maori words translates to self-government, domination, rule, control, power. I believe that this document is about domination, rule, control and power, as it gives, for instance, the primacy to the Maori version of the Treaty of Waitangi, and it does not do anything of a reciprocal kind for the English version. It also says that in terms of the primacy of the Maori version, is that we agree to do everything reasonably possible to support this interpretation. We need, I believe, to have plain English as an ideal for our agendas, and this is the most unplain English agenda that I can remember in my many years. The entire item 7 should be in plain English with a glossary of Maori equivalent words where appropriate. English should have primacy, as it is the only first language of all elected representatives.
Point of order, Councillor Hulane.
That statement is factually incorrect because in New Zealand we have 3 official languages, Māori, English and Sign Language.
Look, I won't uphold the point of order because it's about the context, and I mean, I think we'll just leave Councillor van der Vest to continue with his debate. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have 2 more pages of problems with this, and I don't have time to go through them.
That's right.
So I will just conclude by saying that I believe this agreement has onerous and wide-ranging implications for democracy. It is another step towards co-governance and te puapua. The claim that the 2006 MOU needs to be replaced, I believe, has no basis in fact. The previous MOU met all legal treaty requirements. This is a rushed agreement without consultation, without proper legal or consideration, and we will have a very long tail and enormous costs, in my view, as well as a strong public backlash once repercussions become obvious. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Where to start? I want to begin by saying that on a continuum, this is part of a continuum, and we are at the end point of this particular stage of the continuum. This Memorandum of Understanding didn't just get spirited out of the air. It has been a very long process. We've had the original one for 16 years, as we've been reminded. And I want to acknowledge the work that has gone on to arrive at this point, both the work of staff and Jeanette Wikaira in particular in leading that. I want to acknowledge the relationship building by Mayor Dave Carl and Mayor Aaron Hawkins, and we have landed in this place today. And we have been reminded that this is a relationship agreement and that it is an updating of what we had 16 years ago. It should not be a surprise that as the relationship has matured and we've made progress, that we need to update it and we need to update the language. So that shouldn't come as a surprise. I want to acknowledge Mara Whenua's graciousness in all of this, in the toing and froing. And I consider this to be a particularly important milestone on the way to a new stage in our relationship. And I'm very hopeful about that in terms of deepening the relationship further. I just want to correct one point, and that is around participation in the Māori Participation Working Party in the last triennium, while not all councillors were members, there was repeated and consistent invitations to attend, in which I did, in fact, on many occasions. And I reflect on Councillor Lord's comments about the development of the relationship as he saw it, and he spoke about that in his valediction speech. I look forward to it being signed on Friday, Mr. Mayor, and it being a celebration, as it is planned to be, and this being the start of something new. I think there's general agreement around the table on that. I look forward to us continuing to work in partnership with mana whenua in a true partnership into the future. It is the way of the future. And I want to offer up a whakatauki. It's a kaitahu whakatauki that I think really resonates for this. And it's mō tātou a mō ka uri a muri a kēnei, for us and our children after us. It's around how we conduct ourselves going forward for the future of the next generations and the generation beyond that. And I look forward to Friday. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got, to repeat, I commend this document to you. I don't think it represents a surprise. I think it represents an update of what we had previously. And there are no huge changes in here, but there are some significant ones. And rather than having large changes, what it produces, to my mind, is a deeper understanding. And it is, after all, a memorandum of understanding. So there was just a minor correction as far as treaty partners and some clarification as what it is meant by who should speak about the agreement. But anyone can speak about it in their own private capacities. But when it comes to the parties to the agreement, namely the DCC and Te Urunaka, it is important that there is collaboration about what is presented to the public from those parties. And so, as far as the Te Reo glossary is concerned, there are nuances of understanding for many words in the English language, but similarly in the Te Reo, there are many nuances of understanding. So it's fitting and proper that, and rather than just replacing a word with a word, we have this glossary of nuance of meaning included in the back. And so and that helps, I think, with understanding of the agreement so that people get a better feel of what is felt by mana whenua when it comes to certain words. And it is entirely appropriate that there's rather a lot more te reo in this memorandum than there was in the previous, because the population of New Zealand as a whole is growing, ever growing, in their understanding of te reo and their understanding of te ao Māori. So they are learning more and more about the Māori world, and having a document like this that does makes liberal use of Māori terms is entirely appropriate for a memorandum of understanding between these two parties. Now, similarly, it is important that we acknowledge the primacy of the te reo language of Te Tiriti when it comes to what is the document that mana whenua will refer to when we're talking about this Treaty of Waitangi. You will notice that throughout this, the papers, and including in the Memorandum of Understanding itself, there is constant reference in English to the treaty, because it is natural that English-speaking people using English as their first language, and anyone that just comes across this document will read it in English and understand it in English, and the English version of the treaty is included in the appendices. However, those that signed the treaty will have read it or had it presented to them in te reo. So it is only natural that for those people who signed it, understanding the te reo version, the primacy of that version should be paramount to them when it comes to interpreting Te Tiriti or the treaty, whichever way you look at it. So the primacy of te reo for mana whenua is absolutely, in my mind, is absolutely appropriate to be included in this document. It is, after all, a memorandum of understanding to repeat yet again. The English language is used throughout, and the treaty is referred to repeatedly, and it's clear that primacy for normal English speakers, typical English speakers, should I say, that is paramount for them. So, as agents of the Crown, we are indeed agents of the Crown, and the previous agenda item was all about that. We are agents of the Crown to regulate speed limits in the city as set down by the Crown in their rules, so which we have to apply across the city. So there are many instances when we are acting for the Crown and we are an agent of the Crown, and that may include being a treaty partner or not, depending on the situation. So the languaging that has been, and we see throughout this document, is entirely appropriate. And I think, as such, I look forward to signing it, and I look forward to fresh interaction between the two parties involved, and I look forward to greater communication and understanding. Thank you. I'm now going to put the motion. Division, yes. So we'll put the motion by division. I'll ask Ms Adamson to call the division, please.
Councillor Ackland. Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Benson Pope. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Gilbert.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan. Councillor Lafiso. Aye. Councillor Lucas.
Aye.
Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Weatherall.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Mayor Raddick.
Aye.
Carried 14-1.
Thank you. And on that note, I think it's an appropriate time to break for lunch. Can I have a mover, Councillor Walker, seconded Councillor O'Malley? Thank you. All those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. We'll have some lunch. Okay, we can carry on, get underway. We're on to item number 8, page 87 of the agenda. This is councillor appointments to outside organisations. I'll just speak very briefly to the report. There's a number of recommendations there. There's still some things to come, but largely it's there, and I've endeavoured, as you know, to listen and talk to everyone about the various appointments and cater to various people's ideas of what they want and their requests, and also some of the requests of outside organisations, and various recommendations from across the board. So for me, it's always about trying to reach as good a consensus as I am able. So would anyone, so I'd move a recommendation, yes, seconded by, that we approve the appointments, seconded by Councillor Wiley. And would anyone like to speak to the report? Given that we have no one to speak to the report, I move that the Council approves the council appointments to outside organisations as proposed in attachment A. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. All right. Item number 9, interim delegations. I'd request that the Chief, Sandy Graham, speaks to the report, please.
I'm happy to take it as read, councillors, and answer any questions.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Firstly, Councillor Benson Pope.
Just an observation, Mr Mayor. There's a correction necessary in paragraph 17. There's reference to a non-existent committee that needs to be sorted.
Thank you, Sharon will edit that.
Thank you. Any, yes?
And further to
Councillor
that,
Lucas.
on number 26, should be the Infrastructure and Services Committee, not Infrastructure Services and Networks Committee. Thank you.
Any other commentary? Okay. in which case I'll put the motion. I don't have anything else to say other than what we've got, so I'm now going to put the motion. Oh, seconder? Sorry. Okay, seconded Councillor Wiley. I thought I got that before. Sorry. So I put the motion, and I've moved the motion. Councillor Wiley has seconded. And I will now put the motion that we approve the interim delegations for the Hearings Committee and note the fully updated version of the Council Structure and Delegations Manual will be considered by Council in January 2023. Okay, so all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And so we move to the final item on the agenda, number 10, and I will move my notice of motion that the Council requests an urgent report on the cost and timeframes for reinstating the St Clair groin, potentially on a trial basis. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Vandervis, thank you. I now speak to this notice of motion. It's been a long time. Across the last 3 or 4 years, as there's been considerable debate about the beach at St Clair. And there's a range of opinions on the groin and what should be done about the beach. And many people have an opinion on the matter, including 4,500 who've signed a petition. However, I think it's timely to collate the various opinions and in particular the expert reports on the groin and pull them together to get a more up-to-date and accurate cost and time frame for reinstating those poles. I think there's certainly a very strong desire on the part of the public, and as we can see from the number of people that voted to put me into office, that is an indication of one sort. But there are also opinions to the other. So this is requesting a report on the cost and the timeframes for doing it on a trial basis, and the various pros and cons for reinstating the poles can be argued at this stage. But I think, obviously I think that it is a timely thing to call for a report, because I've had various estimates of the cost of the groin from 50,000, 100,000 and 150,000 was at a previous council report, and maybe that has changed, maybe not. We did have, at the last time we did debate the poles or the reinstatement of the groin, we had various estimates put on the table or discharged into the airwaves around the council table of up to $500,000. However, now is the appropriate time, I think, to get a comprehensive staff report on the matter, and so that we will then have something to form the foundation of a debate. So, would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think there'd be any disagreement around the table or in the wider community about the fact that we have a problem at St Clair. Indeed, we have a problem that extends to the whole Ocean Beach coast and other parts of the city. And that concern was what led to the plan, which I alerted you to the existence of over the weekend. And that plan, produced by, overseen by Councillor O'Malley and yourself, developed the strategy for moving forward on the whole beach and lists a number of actions while referencing groin development, not actually alerting anyone specifically to the immediacy of such a proposal. In fact, the first interesting thing of many at the start of the plan document is the statement that, quote, "We are grateful to be working with Otakau and we will continue to work together as this plan moves forward. And I look forward to hearing how that happened as part of what's being proposed here. That plan cost us $700,000, more than $700,000. We know that. And despite that, we're now back to what seems to me to be this idea might work, so let's give it a try. And that, I don't think, is the appropriate approach to decision making that we should be taking as a local authority. I think rational voters expect us to use our judgment to make good decisions based on expert advice, and this motion is none of that. Last time we had a geomorphologist saying it wouldn't fly. This morning, a different university academic, also an expert, saying it was of limited advantage, apart from his sympathy for the aesthetics of iconic poles sticking out of the beach. So I'm concerned that in the context of this existing plan, which was published in, 6-8 months ago, unanimously agreed by council as a pathway forward, that we are deviating from that. And I think that's embarrassing, and I think it's an insult to those people who were involved in a very extensive and very expensive consultation process. I think there's also a lack of clarity about what's being talked about. Poles, groins, I've seen the photographs. Most of the sand retention, in my understanding, came from scrub and brush fences that stopped windblown sand. And I don't think people who talk about the poles in whatever form in recent years understand that they were going to be a solid wooden wall down the beach. So there's an issue around that. And I think one of the biggest issues is the issue of the consenting. I don't think anyone at the table or at the ORC table, for that matter, would expect the Regional Council to consent a construction in the coastal marine area without expert scientific support. That's just not going to happen. So I'm bemused in that context, about why it's back, given the agreed plan we have for the whole coast and specific steps and pathways for each particular area. I recognise the passion and I guess fixation with the idea, but I can't fathom the support of some people around the table who've been involved with that plan and its development for something that expert advice tells us isn't a goer and flies in the face of the previous consultations and the previous planning that's been done. And in my view, that's no way to run a city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bandavis.
On the issue of expert advice, we need to go back quite a few years and look at the first Tonkin and Taylor report on the Te-Raoni breakwater. And the expert advice there was that, it's not really going to work. The problem is created by ships, and that Te-Raoni can't really be saved. What happened was that was apparently the wrong answer, and council waited a few years before going back to Tonkin and Taylor and asking them to do the report again. And this time Tonkin and Taylor, being the experts, were a wee bit less equivocal, and they said, well, it's probably unlikely, but it might work. So the experts have, in this particular case, the same expert, come up with really quite different reports at different times, depending on what the political wind that was blowing was. I agree with Councillor Benson-Pope when he says we need to make a good decision. But I believe that this decision is the good decision. I think the decision to spend $700,000 on a plan and still have nothing for it, when for a fraction of that money we could have actually done an experiment, and we accept that it may not be particularly successful. But rather than spend all these hundreds of thousands of dollars on experts and their plans, why don't we just go ahead, do the experiment, put the thing in? It will have some amenity value even if it doesn't have a massive increase in sand retention. And we will then be in a position of being able to know, rather than these years of more reports and more experts and lots of opinion. To me, this council generally spends far too much money on reports, spends far too much money on consultants, and not enough money on actually doing stuff. I see value in actually doing this. I think that Councillor Raddick, when he was Councillor Raddick, did an amazing job of actually researching and finding the photographs and making comparisons of before and after, which to my mind at least opened the door for this thing could probably work, and in the past it appears to have done so. So I'm entirely supportive of this on the basis that I think it's one of the cheaper options that we can have for this. And as you know, I'm very keen not to spend too much money. I don't want to see any more $700,000 plans. I want to see the experiment done. I hope that we get behind it, and I look forward to whatever learnings come from it.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't think anyone's questioning the passion behind this, but I'm certainly not. I'm passionate about not spending money on things that may probably work. I'm definitely aware that today what we're asking for is a report and not the various reasons why a reinstated groin may or may not work. That debate, I guess, will be for a future date because, I mean, looking at who's signed the notice of motion, I've got a sense this may pass today. So I'll save my already large list of reasons why this likely won't work for that debate, if and when a staff report comes back to us around this table. And when I say my large list of reasons, they're not actually mine, but reasons emanating from actual experts, individuals who spend their life dedicated to the study of how the Earth's surface is formed and changed by rivers, mountains, oceans, air and ice. Their study involves endless amounts of fieldwork and research. These women and men are worth listening to. And it would be ironic if this report comes back to us on February the 2nd, because that's Groundhog Day in the US. And the subject of the groin feels to me a bit like Groundhog Day. And I'm also, I mean, those of you who have been with me around this time, I'm often one for supporting requests for reports on new and exciting ideas, but this just isn't one of them. It's been before us and a number of times and covered extensively by our friends behind us at the Fourth Estate. But ironically, groins were mentioned as a potential option in the excellent St Clair St Kilda Coastal Plan, which was adopted by this council at the meeting on 22nd of February this year. This thankfully means that we do already have a plan to inform how this coast is managed and how it will need to adapt in time to the effects of coastal hazards and climate change. It cost us nearly $750,000. I prefer to defer to that document where on page 31 it doesn't suggest reinstating the St Clair groin as pointed out in this notice of motion, but states among a number of options, and I'll quote, multiple groins, that's multiple groins likely to be required to retain sufficient sand. Alternatively, large import sand volume and periodic top-up would be expensive and disruptive. So I won't be supporting this notice of motion, but I would like to pose a number of questions to the Mayor that he can perhaps answer in his right of reply. Firstly, how much is too much for an experiment? Is it 250k? Is it $500,000? Is it $1 million plus? Secondly, how long is too long to gain a coastal consent permit, if indeed it's possible? Is it 1 year, 2 years? Is it longer? And finally, how much evidence that one very large groin won't work would you need to be convinced that we should actually follow the recommendations of the excellent and aforementioned St Clair, St Kilda Coastal Plan? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hurland.
Thank you. Actually, Councillor Walker has mentioned some of the things I was going to say, is that Tom, who was one of the staff that worked on the coastal plan, mentioned at one of our meetings that groins were not ruled out of the coastal plan and were something they were considering including, which of course Councillor Walker referred to himself. So I see no problem if the council's report and planning is saying yes, a groin could be included into our coastal plan. They clearly wouldn't put that there, as you've stated before, because they're experts. Clearly wouldn't have put it, a suggestion of having it there if there was no benefit to it. Also, the original groin was put there for a reason, and it would have been done, you know, with a purpose to help the beach, obviously, which is why it was there. But I don't see any problem in putting a trial, as it's going to be part of the bigger coastal plan as it is anyway. So I support this. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a request for a report, right? And that would seem pretty innocuous and not difficult at all. However, in the notice of motion, it mentions a potential trial, and I wonder, and this is a question I'd like answered, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean that it might be a trial or it might not be a trial? It might be there permanently. The problem is that we have been here before, and just a few months ago, and we already know that there's no scientific evidence to support the reinstatement of a groin. We don't need another report to tell us that. I will give to the nominator and those supporting this the compliment of consistency and persistence, that's certain, and the passion, but that doesn't make it right. And I too refer to the coastal plan, which by the way won international awards, and it was extensive engagement with the community over 2 years. And there's been a lot of talk in the months leading up to now about improving our engagement with the community. And in fact, this won an award because of that extensive engagement. And that was a very large part of the coastal plan. The mention of a groin used the word very clearly might, and it was reflecting the kinds of possibilities that may be there. However, mana whenua in that coastal plan talked about restoring natural habitat, and that we would not see that, it would come to fruition in generations to come. And there was comment too about moving away from reactive responses, and I consider this to be a reactive response. I just want to address something that was said about Tauroni. I've been involved very closely with the Tauroni project for many years, and the essential difference is that Tauroni Beach is in the harbour, so it is quite a different scenario. And I heard mention too of a range of opinions. I go on evidence as opposed to opinions. Everybody has a different opinion, and I acknowledge the passion around the aesthetics of the poles, and I thought it was very helpful that Associate Professor Mark Hilton in this morning's paper acknowledged that people like the poles. They're in wedding photographs, they're in paintings, and so forth. But I would suggest to you that 4,500 people, many of them had the poles in their mind as opposed to the groin structure, which is quite a different matter. We heard this morning at Public Forum about not wasting money. And yet here we have some of the same people who campaigned on not spending money frivolously, now advocating to spend money on something that we are told by experts, and that's plural, will not work. In fact, I'm going to quote those experts to you just briefly. Groins work in certain types of coast, and this is not that type of coast. And the particular point, it's not worth trying. That's from Associate Professor Mark Hilton. Associate Professor Wayne Stevenson said similar things earlier this year, or some months ago, and as he did back in 2017. He's been very consistent in his views. So, interestingly enough, the coastal environment's often described as dynamic, and I just remind people that we are still understanding the impacts of climate change on our coast, and in the last week there have been two research projects identified and commented on, one around the height of waves, which is changing due to climate change, and another around temperatures in the water, which will affect the winds. So we are in a dynamic coastal environment, and we need to work to understand that before we go and carry out measures and put structures on the beach. And I wonder where mana whenua fits into this in terms of what mana whenua's view would be. And I guess, well, I would expect that would be part of the consent process. But I cannot vote for this in all good conscience. I form my views based on science, on evidence, and that leads me to vote against this motion. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Ackland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To put things into perspective, 11 years ago I was on the Ocean Beach Working Party, and we all know that I've been gone from council for the last 9 years, and so I don't know exactly everything that has gone on, but it seems to me that the coastal plan that came out of that particular working group, which cost a fortune, bringing the consultants down from Christchurch on a regular basis, and just by the by, I remember them going back urgently at one of our meetings because the second Christchurch earthquake hit whilst we were in that meeting, which is why it stands out to me. But since then, it seems to me, other than a few sand sausages, nothing's really been done. We've got all these consultants, we've got all these scientists, we've got all this, all these recommendations as to best practice and so on. But other than a few sand sausages, nothing seems to be done. And so we talk about evidence, and when experts talk about evidence of saying, and a lot of speakers have as well, don't do the groin because it won't work in this particular environment, where's their proof to say it won't work? Because if they haven't done it anywhere, in particular here, then there is no evidence to say it won't work. When it comes to spending money, the cost of these sorts of plans and so on that win awards what, because of words on a piece of paper? I'm sorry, that doesn't cut it as far as I'm concerned. You should be winning the awards out of the results that you get from what's written on that piece of paper. And again, I get back to the fact that I don't believe there has been much actually rolled out in terms of putting things into practice to deal with the issues that we have along the coastline. So I would like to suggest that when this report comes back, should this pass, that if the costs are such that to have an experimental opportunity to gain evidence one way or the other, I think would be worth considering. So I'll be supporting this particular motion as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously, we are considering the request for a report to be done, and I think Councillor Benson Pope and Councillor Gary have outlined some of the things that I would expect to see in that report. I would also expect that in the report we would look at the cost of maintaining the sand sausages as they exist at the moment. They are slumping and failing, and they are looking to have a substantial amount of work done on them in the near-term future. And the reason that we are working on the sand sausages is because we're protecting not just those houses on that side of Victoria Road, but the unknown area of Kettle Park. Now, part of the coastal plan says that if events cause triggers, we might move faster. I believe that the storms this winter could have been considered a triggering event, and maybe in the report again I would be looking to see whether or not we are getting near a trigger event and therefore effectively operating the plan as it was written. When it comes to expert evidence, I would remind everybody carrying a British passport that expert evidence on the ability to safely eat hamburger meat meant that people ended up getting mad cow disease. Experts are not infallible. They are well aware of their area of expertise and can at times even go beyond it. And I will also quote Professor Wayne Stevenson and Associate Professor Mike Hilton. Because what I've seen in the last 3 weeks was two contradictory pieces of expert evidence. One said that the beach is in steady state and not being eroded. The other one said the beach is showing clear signs of erosion, and the sand that's been displaced from the dunes at the moment could be as much as 1,000 years old. If we are talking about restoration of the natural habitat, then I think we need to look at the size of those dunes when they were before South Dunedin got developed into a habitable area. Much of the sand that was used to elevate South Dunedin was pulled off those dunes, and they were actually as big as the Tomahawk dunes. So what is restoration of a natural environment? What is the expert evidence? I don't think it's as clear-cut and as obvious as to say that you would not go forward with a groin at this point, because I think I am very conscious of the Kettle Park landfill and the fact that we are spending a lot of money on the sand sausages right now, and I would expect a report to take into account those obvious risks that we are facing right now. The fact that this beach groins would not work on this beach, the only thing that's happened since they last worked on this beach is the hydro schemes on the Clutha, and they will need to be taken into account when you look at the possibility of success. But groins have worked on this beach, so the idea to say that they can't work on this beach was pretty much in the face of historical evidence to show that they did work on this beach. I think we are back at a point of saying, with the Clutha having been dammed and substantially less material coming down it, we are in a state of uncertainty as to whether they would or would not work. That should need to be compared against the cost of the maintenance of the sand sausages. I would expect to see that in the report. And it should also, we would need to be considering in this report, when it comes to us, the threat of Kettle Park and our ability to remediate that in time. Or will we have to extend the sand sausages even further down, and what would that cost be? And I would hope that this comes in time for the annual plan consultation, or if not, the long-term plan consultation afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
Firstly, I was happy to support this notice of motion. And I think, first off, I commend Mayor Radich for all the time and energy he's put into this over the years. He began this before he was actually a councillor. And I think anybody who wants to vote against this notice of motion will look at the fact that actually, I doubt there was anyone in the community who didn't understand that Mayor Radich had a key focus around the groins of St Clair. In a sense, many of the trolls on social media said that's all he was about. So when I look at that and I go, there is no surprises here. We knew this was coming. We know there's going to be another notice of motion coming that he campaigned on through the campaign. That's fact. The key issue that we have to look at is this is a request for an urgent report on the costs and timeframes for reinstating the St Clair groin, potentially on a trial basis. Let's stick to the wording of the motion, and let's focus on the wording of the motion. And trust me, there's going to be plenty of time to debate the rest of the issues around St Clair Beach, the groin, the rest of the beaches in Middle Beach and into St Kilda. Yes, the coastal plan was a good document and a very positive document, and it won awards and everything else. But the key factor is, let's stick to the motion that we have in front of us. And others will want to bring a request for reports in the future. And when you've got an evidence issue like this, or not an evidence issue, but an issue like this that we knew that was coming, I think it's important that we actually do consider it. We owe it to the community to consider it. And I think that's what this is about. This is about delivering for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do want to support this motion for a report, and I go back to the St Clair St Kilda coastal plan, and when it goes to next steps, it talks about preferred pathways, etc. And it says identification of a preferred pathway. It talks about previous sections of this plan, including some possible pathways for the coast, including on page 9 discussion about groins and sand nourishing and structures, etc. So it says to further assess and select the preferred pathway for each section. We will. this is what we're proposing to do, undertake further work to assess the performance of alternative options, develop concept designs and cost estimates for shortlisted pathways, and score each pathway against community aspirations and technical and cost criteria. So the Clair St Kilda plan was actually based on the adaptive management approach, and I think that's actually part of what we're doing here today, is actually getting a report together in time. One would hope to go through the annual plan process, to go out to public consultation and have a lot more information in trying to make this decision. This is an adaptive management approach. There have been no decisions made about what we're doing about St Clair, St Kilda, and obviously we need to keep moving. And it says also in the report here, in the plan, we're committed to keeping the community involved in this process as things move forward. So if we get costs, etc., ready for the annual plan, then the community will have the opportunity to consult on this. However, we obviously have to go back to expert advice, which, as Councillor O'Malley said, some experts say this, some experts say that, so we do need to keep that in mind. Happy to support to get another report, so then we can discuss it at the time.
Thank you. Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sitting listening to everybody, it's become, not that I didn't know it anyway, but it has been an issue for many years. And over that time, little to nothing has been achieved of practical relevance, so surely continued delays will achieve little more. And so with it having been an issue for so long, to use a phrase that this is a reactive response, if this is the speed with which we react, we have some serious issues more greater than this. In terms of wasting money, delay after delay after delay potentially might waste more. It may also cost significantly more if those delays, as has been pointed out, I believe by Councillor O'Malley, that there could be a trigger event that might mean that Kettle Park is of significant issue, immediate significant issue. And in terms of expert advice, again, you sort of stole some of my thunder, Councillor O'Malley, that at various times throughout history, experts have said, among many other things, that the sun revolved around the earth was flat, man would not achieve flight, and I had completely forgotten about the lasagna fiasco in England. So experts are fallible, and you can find an expert to agree or disagree with almost anything. So I will be very much supporting this.
Councillor Fisa.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor. I just, consistently, I have voted against motions in the past of this, similar to this motion that we're considering now. And I don't have any more words to add to the debate, except I imagine that all of us received Mr Mike Idor's email, so I'll just summarise from him. And he says, while he strongly applauds Jules Raddick in bringing Ocean Beach in focus, I strongly dispute that replacing the groin at St Clair is a sustainable action. And the most logical, in his opinion, and we all have opinions, as we've said, the most logical and sustainable solution is to return the playing fields of Kettle Park to dunes while also removing the steep profile. This will provide a very necessary supply of sand to return to the beach in north-east conditions and restore the natural process to a greater extent than any hard engineering. It's not a romantic solution, and it's going to be a very costly one, but I just thought I should represent one view of a member of the public. And he says also that he endorses the coastal plan, which is supported by many experts and also members of the public. And I don't, and with all this talk about experts, I don't think we should leave out the public. And I just want to refer to the previous debate about concerns about Māori aspirations, mana whenua aspirations. In my opinion and perspective and world view and life experience, Māori are the experts in terms of their experience and in terms of having to cope with the imposition of colonisation by the Treaty of Waitangi. Kia ora.
So I think we've exhausted questions, therefore I would like to reply to a few of those. In the first instance, I agree with Deputy Mayor Barker. The coastal plan is an adaptive management plan, and it calls for assessing the performance of all options. So this report calls for an assessment of the groins with price and timeframes, but also putting in the groins on a trial basis gives us a real life ability to assess the performance of that groin that is an existing coastal object. And to that end, there's a lot of talk of geographers that would like to retreat and turn the Kettle Park playing fields into sand dunes and move the coastline back quite close to Victoria Road. But the people that live along Victoria Road do not share that opinion. They would like some more certainty about the protection of their homes, and they are rather distressed at the performance of the sand sausages, which have cost more than $2 million and possibly up to $4 million, and they have required constant maintenance in recent times, certainly every second year, but sometimes every year. So there's quite a lot of money deployed to simply maintaining those geotextile bags, and they have not prevented erosion one tiny bit. I would also like to quote some genuine experts that were proven correct in their day, going back to 1901, from the city engineer, Blair Mason, who said the method of promoting sand accumulation by means of groins extending out beyond the high water mark is evidently peculiarly adapted to the conditions prevailing at Ocean Beach and should assuredly be tried before attempting the construction of sea-opposing walls, and I'll put in brackets after that, such as been relatively recently installed on the beach, geotextile bags, which is really a sea-opposing wall. Now, there's a completely contradictory expert opinion to that as expressed by Dr. Hilton in the paper this morning. However, looking at results, Dr. Hilton has been consulting with this council for some time and will have earned a considerable amount of money from that. And what are the results? We have at the St Kilda end of the beach, where there is no problem, some cuts in the sand dunes which have accumulated a little bit of sand in behind. But at the St Clair end, there has been no improvement and continual erosion. I'll now quote you from 1906, the Ocean Beach Domain Board annual report. Faced with a bill of £20,000 to build a better wall at St Clair, instead, after groins were installed in 1902 by the previous city engineer, Blair Mason, the report said, groins at a total cost of £500, not £20,000, have not only effectively stopped erosion at the foreshore, but have built up the beach from 4 to 6 feet over an area of many acres. It's a real result on that beach, as reported, in the Otago Daily Times from the Ocean Beach Domain Board, who were charged with protection of that beach. Moving on to 1921, when the groins were reinstalled, and Dr. Hilton reports in the paper this morning that he read a letter to the editor at that time, before the groins were installed. There's new groins, in fact, the remains of which are still there on the beach, and that's the one that I'm proposing gets repaired. Here's a report prior that groin being installed from the Otago District Engineer. And he said, there was active erosion in progress before the groins were erected, meaning the previous ones by Blair Mason. The erosion stopped immediately the groins were erected, and the groins fell into disrepair and erosion recommenced once the groins fell into disrepair. And certainly that groin is in a state of disrepair right now. in 1923, it's a very favourable report once again from the Ocean Beach Domain Board. 1955, the New Zealand Chief Engineer, the head of the Ministry of Works in New Zealand, C.W.O. Turner. This is the engineer that built the Wairaki geothermal power station. This is the engineer that built the Manapuri power station. He is the preeminent and awarded engineer of New Zealand at that time. His quote is, "Groins are the most successful method, as has been well proved over the past 50 years. And that groin that he put in 1955, the remains of it, there's still some remains of it there now, but it was smashed to bits by the ocean around about 2014. Now, there is no doubt about the groins, and there's a lot of talk about the St Clair St Kilda Coastal Plan, which is an adaptive management pathway, but there was about 2,000 people consulted in the preparation of that report. Compare that to the 4,500 people that signed a petition to reinstate the groin. Now, the groin and the poles are absolutely synonymous, because when the poles get replaced as a groin, then there's planking on those poles, but that planking, what has historically happened, is that planking disappears underneath the vast area of sand that accumulates as a result. We only have to look at Karatani, where a very small groin made of driftwood accumulated a whole lot of sand. And we only have to look at the Tahuna wastewater outfall pier that was created when the extension to the Tahuna wastewater treatment plant was put in, and the poles and steel poles and a platform on top was required in order to do that. The sand built up very markedly around those poles, and they were just poles without planks. So poles with planks, I fully expect and hope, will prove much more effective at trapping sand than that. And, you know, compare the relatively small cost of a groin being repaired and reinstated with the millions of dollars that has been expended on sand sausages. I think it is well worth doing the experiment, but let's have a report from staff on the cost and timeframes so that we can debate the actual issue when the time comes. So I think there's a lot of other questions that we might like to ask, as Councillor Walker asked. How much is too much? How long is too long? How long is a piece of string, and is it long enough to do the job? These are all unanswerable questions, but which will be partially answered by a report and more fully answered by an actual trial. And then we'll know, because there's an awful lot of speculation and conjecture about will they work and won't they work. We have plenty of historical evidence to say they would, but we also haven't had a recent coastal engineer's opinion on whether they'll work, although I have spoken to several coastal engineers verbally, and they all say it's well worth doing the trial, including Richard Wrenn Hamill, who made the 2011 Tonkin and Taylor report to Council, next to none of which was adopted. However, I suggest, I commend the motion to you that we simply get a report on the cost and timeframes, and then we can bring the debate as to whether we should actually do the trial or not at that time. So I'd like to put the motion.
By division, please.
By division.
Councillor Ackland.
Aye.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Benson Pope. Councillor Gary.
No.
Councillor Gilbert.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
Aye.
Councillor Lafiso.
No.
Councillor Lucas.
Aye.
Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
Aye.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Weatherall. Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Mayor Raddick.
Aye.
Carried 11-4.
Thank you. Now, I think that's the end of us. How about that? So, a very good time. Thank you very much for your participation. And I'd like to thank, on behalf of us all, I'd like to thank the staff who have done a wonderful job of preparing this chamber for us. And what a pleasant place to conduct meetings it is. I particularly prefer the comfort of the chairs, but also it's very easy to see around the room, and we have some nice daylight coming in the window. So thank you very much, Chief, and thank you very much for all of the staff. Thank you.